everyone. The Biohacker DAO folks asked if I can speak about methylene blue. I sent a picture through of my blue tongue, and I think everyone got a little intrigued. And I think this is kind of a compound that a lot of people are hearing about. It certainly had its like viral moments, and just wanted to like take some time and go through what is the actual evidence for this? Where does it come from? Maybe some of the history, the mechanism of action, just really kind of break it down top to bottom. So if you have questions, I hope my headphones are working okay. And feel free to ask. Otherwise, just type them in the chat. And yeah, feel free to stop anytime. Like this is for y'all. Like I don't need to hear myself talk like this. It's gonna be a fun convo. If you guys have any questions. Cool. So just quick disclaimer first. This is medical advice and financial advice. Just kidding, it is absolutely not. Please consult your AI doctor before taking anything or decisions. Yes, Jill. Oh, you meant to laugh, not raise your hand.
Yeah.
I got you. Wait one sec. I'm so sorry.
Is that okay? Can you still hear me? Okay, cool. Sorry, headphones passed. Cool. So Methylene Blue had kind of a viral moment. This happened like maybe a few months ago. RFK was seen on the plane, just basically putting Methylene Blue into his drink, taking it orally. And I think a lot of people are like, well, you know, what the hell is this? What is he putting into his drink? And then it kind of led I think a lot of people who had never heard about it down the rabbit hole of what Methylene Blue is, just given, you know, such a prominent figure, someone who cares about health so much and is just like always talking about, you know, make America healthy again, like, you know, just, you know, seems to be on the right side of kind of the biohacker movement, taking something that, you know, nobody really knew about. So I think this was kind of the spark of Methylene Blue's viral moment. And then eventually like Barstool went and kind of got on the bandwagon and took it themselves and did kind of a feature on it as well. But yeah, no, the funny part is like, if you actually watch this video, you can go find it on like TikTok or whatever. He seems to do 2 full droppers, which is a 10 milligram dose. Likely, most solutions are 1%, and most droppers are 1 milliliter. So very likely that his dose is 10 milligrams. It's just kind of funny. You can see that. Cool. So basically, if you you know, have any sort of exposure to Methylene Blue, maybe you talk to friends who are not, you know, biohackers themselves, but literally every conversation goes like this. They ask, you know, what should I take to help with focus? You say, well, you know, Methylene Blue is interesting. Maybe it'll help. And they go, you want me to try meth? And you go, yes, I want you to try meth. No, obviously a joke, but yeah, I think the important piece here is that Methylene Blue is a super different compound structure, family, mechanism of action to the amphetamines. So they're not the same thing, obviously. Cool. So quick background on its history. I think it's just always interesting to understand like where things come from. And this is also like a particularly interesting kind of background for a compound. So it actually was originally discovered by a chemist who was working at BASF, which is like a massive chemicals manufacturer based in Germany. And they manufactured it as a textile dye. They literally were just making dyes, not for human consumption, not for any sort of medical purpose. It was purely to color clothes. And then this one researcher, I forget where, his name's Paul Ehrlich. He originally used methylene blue as a dye for staining bacteria. So he was kind of taking methylene blue, using it as kind of like a tissue dye for the microscope to kind of observe all the different, you know, cellular components. And what he found was that the bacteria were kind of taking up the dye. And for those of you that have like spent time in the lab, you know that like if a cell is taking up dye, it usually means it is killing that cell. And so he kind of had the hypothesis, actually, you know, maybe this is like a potent antibiotic or antiviral. It makes no sense how scientists back in the day just like tried this, you know, these crazy like experiments. But they basically treated 2 patients with malaria in the 1890s with methylene blue and cured them both. So they found out that methylene blue is actually a super strong treatment for malaria, which is wild that they were allowed to do this stuff. Back in the day, no IRBs. So anyway, this is kind of the synthesis process for methylene blue. The question is like, where does it come from? It's completely synthetic. And it's honestly very boring inorganic chemistry to get from these, basic building blocks all the way to the final structure. So it's not natural, doesn't come from anything, very, very basic, chemistry, and it's completely synthetic. Any questions here so far? Feel free to jump in, guys. Cool. Awesome. So what are its uses medically? So the thing that it has, so the indication that it has FDA approval for is called methemoglobinemia. And what that is basically, so I think most people know what hemoglobin is. So hemoglobin is kind of a protein that carries oxygen. Oxygen is not very soluble in water. And so hemoglobin is basically a protein that kind of carries oxygen in red blood cells. And it does so with an iron ion that has a 2+ charge. And for some people, based on, it can happen genetically. It can also happen from certain environmental stresses, but you actually get an oxidation to this kind of like 3+ ion. And this can basically turn you blue. And what that is it's basically your body like slowly suffocating all of your tissues. And so the funny thing is, if you would guess which one of these two patients took methylene blue, it's actually the right one. So, blue plus methylene blue equals red, which is kind of hilarious. So basically what methylene blue does is it basically reduces methemoglobin to hemoglobin, and it can kind of, it cures these patients very quickly within like, a period of an hour or so. They're basically cured of this issue. And it is also used off-label, as kind of mentioned. It was a treatment for malaria back in the day. They then used methylene blue as a lead compound to become chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine, which many people are probably familiar with, as they were kind of being pushed during the COVID era as kind of off-label COVID treatments. But so I thought that was kind of interesting as well. And then it also is given off-label for other things, UTIs, a specific type of encephalopathy, which is basically brain inflammation, and then certain blood vessel diseases as well. It has an effect on blood vessels, so it's given off-label as well. Any questions, fam? This is interesting, boring. Should I skip? Should we just go straight to?
Yeah, actually, Benji, this is Chris. How you doing?
Oh no, I can't hear.
You can't hear. Can you hear me now? Hello, hello?
Cool.
You can hear me now?
I'm going to try to reconnect my headphones. I'm so sorry.
Can you hear me now? Hello, hello?
I'm going to rejoin.
The rest of you, can you hear Chris when he was talking?
Yes.
Cool,
Yeah.
cool. Fantastic.
Can someone try to talk, please?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, I can.
Okay. So, question. So, I already take hydroxychloroquine. Does that mean I should not try methylene blue, do you think?
It's a great question. I actually don't know what the difference in mechanism of action is and whether there are drug-drug interactions. I actually have no idea.
Okay.
But I would look it up. I would certainly look it up before taking them together,
Right.
let alone concurrently over a period of time.
Cool. Thanks.
Cool. So how does it actually work? So basically the primary hypothesized mechanism of action is as an electron donor between complex 1 and cytochrome C of the electron transport chain. If you guys remember from biology, the electron transport chain is what goes on in mitochondria and enables you to produce most of your ATP. So this is the most energy productive kind of like pathway in cells. You of course have glycolysis, that produces like 2 ATP, and then mitochondria in the electron transport chain produce about like, I think it's like 30 something ATP. So it's much more energetically efficient. But there are actually a few issues with the electron transport chain. So when you have these kind of proton donors, I think you might remember the acronyms NADH and FADH2. They donate protons to this kind of like intermembrane space that, kind of like proton buildup is what actually like drives ATP production and ATP synthase. It's basically a battery. You create kind of like a concentration gradient. So what is supposed to happen is electrons are supposed to flow between one complex and the next. The problem is some electrons leak. So the proton gets passed, and the electrons, rather than going through all of the complexes, they actually leak into like the mitochondrial matrix. And they combine with things like oxygen, and they produce things like superoxide and hydrogen peroxide, which you may have heard of before. Why is that a bad thing? Because those are very reactive oxygen species. Oxygen is a super reactive element, and it basically goes and kind of wreaks havoc in your body, specifically at the like protein level. So we'll go and oxidize a ton of proteins, denature them. And there are a lot of theories around aging that basically come from reactive oxygen species as the basis. So basically, in layman's terms, people think that ROS is like a huge contributor to the aging phenotype. And so the thinking with methylene blue is it can be ionized quite well. It accepts these electrons from complex 1 if they get leaked, right? If they don't go into the inner membrane, it accepts the electrons and passes them to cytochrome C. So basically, it directly kind of like shuttles them from one to the other. This is the hypothesized mechanism, and there is some solid evidence that this is the case. Number one is because they have looked at cytochrome C oxidase, which is complex 4. Its activity is increased by 70% in people that are taking methylene blue, which is very strong evidence that this is actually the mechanism. And yeah, basically, if you give methylene blue 2 cells in a dish and measure their ATP output, they are outputting more ATP. So of course, you can never really know the mechanism. But I think there's some really strong evidence that this one is actually true. Cool. So yeah, basically just kind of to recap, methylene blue basically decreases ROS and increases ATP production. Cool. It has another like extremely important mechanism of action as well. So I think it's a super interesting, piece of like pharmacology is that it can, any compound can have like a multitude of mechanisms. And this one is certainly not to be like forgotten. Methylene blue is a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. So monoamine oxidase is what breaks down specific neurotransmitters. There are kind of 2 isoforms of monoamine oxidase, A and B. They break down different neurotransmitters. Many of these you may have heard of before: serotonin, dopamine, melatonin. These are all neurotransmitters, basically that your neurons use to coordinate certain functions, reward mechanisms, etc. And monoamine oxidase breaks them down. And so the idea is that because methylene blue is a MAOA natural inhibitor, you basically increase the concentration of all of these neurotransmitters in the brain. And it is because of this, if you are taking a serotonin modulator, an SSRI, or anything in that kind of drug class, it is contraindicated with taking methylene blue. Basically, you do not take them together. And the reason for that is you can get massive buildup of serotonin in the brain, and it's called serotonin syndrome, and it is not something to be messed around with. Go for it.
If you're taking 5-HTP or L-tyrosine, does it also lead to like serotonin syndrome or some sort of issues?
I don't know. It's a great question. I would look that up too. I have no idea, but potentially. I think both are productive for serotonin and contribute to higher serotonin concentrations. So, but yeah, I would say that's actually a good hypothesis. I would say potentially.
So it's safe to assume that if you're like microdosing on LSD, you might have the same effect because LSD essentially does the same thing, sort of, right? It blocks out the
So
receptors.
LSD is affinity for the serotonin receptors, but it doesn't modulate serotonin concentrations. So it's slightly different. I don't know how that. I don't know whether LSD affects serotonin concentrations, though, but I do know it has affinity for 5-HT,
Okay.
HT2A, whatever the receptor is, the serotonin receptor.
So it could be possible to microdose on LSD and take methylene blue at the same time.
I
Theoretically.
would be extremely careful with all of these
Okay.
things.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. The hard part is like there's never really good literature around this stuff, right? And it's like very difficult to get a study like that financed. Like who's gonna study? Who's gonna finance the methylene blue LSD microdosing trial? Like it's kind of hard to get. So yeah, I would read anecdotes. I would look at any sort of papers that have been published when trying to understand these drug-drug interactions as much as you can. Just use whatever's out there and be careful. The third mechanism, which is actually also important because it has effects on like what there are certain circulatory diseases that have to do with over vasodilation that methylene blue is used for, and it is because methylene blue is also a vasoconstrictor. So methylene blue inhibits nitric oxide synthase, and nitric oxide synthase converts or basically creates nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator. So it basically inhibits a vasodilator and therefore is a vasoconstrictor. There's tons of other papers that have been published about several other conditions, all of which seem fairly interesting. However, it is not indicated for any of these, meaning it's not, on label, that it has never been FDA approved for any of these indications, but there's very interesting data that's been published on each of them, both like in vitro and vivo, some are in human as well, these studies. So, of course, it's very difficult to synthesize all of this. I think the important piece is that the FDA hasn't approved methylene blue for the treatment of any of these. Cool. So kind of like a really important question, at least one that I'm personally interested in. Like, I didn't give any sort of background, but I work on a project called Pump.Science, where we are trying to find longevity increasing compounds. The question of whether methylene blue is a longevity enhancer is certainly like an important question to like me and our project. What you're looking at here are Kaplan-Meier curves, which are basically survival curves that were generated by the interventions testing program. And for those of you who don't know the ITP, I highly, highly recommend checking it out. It's probably one of the most important kind of like research programs that is being run today. And basically what they do is they take a bunch of mice, thousands and thousands of mice across several different sites. I think there's 3 primary sites, and they test them with everything to see like what is their effect on lifespan. And I think this is super important work. It's highly underfunded. And they just see, they basically mix in the compounds with the mouse chow, and they see like, does it extend lifespan? They've obviously had like a lot of great positive controls. Things like rapamycin and metformin show up. They discovered that 17-alpha estradiol has like a massive effect, especially for males. But the important piece here is that methylene blue had basically no effect on longevity. Go for it, Chris.
Yeah, is Aubrey de Grey involved in that ITP?
I don't know if he's involved. It's run by a guy named Rich Miller.
Okay. It sounds like something Aubrey was talking about doing, but I don't know. Thanks.
Maybe. This is like this is funded by the NIA, I think, the National Institute for Aging. I think this is some of the coolest work in the world being done right now. And they only get like they get like $5 million, and they test hundreds and hundreds of compounds. You have to apply to get a compound submitted. And I've talked to a few people that are submitting compounds to it. I think this is the most important work ever, like figuring out what compounds makes us live longer. But yeah, methylene blue does not seem to be one of them, even though you've got these really like sexy, interesting mechanics of how it could decrease ROS and improve ATP production. The effect seems to be really minute. So I think given this is the kind of the most established study that we have, one should assume that methylene blue does not extend longevity. Let's read this question here.
Yeah, so another
let me just address this question super quickly.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll get to it later. So I actually have a slide on this exact question, and the question is, does methylene blue stay in your brain? But yeah, I have some fun stuff later. We'll get to that. Go for it though, Chris.
I lost my train of thought. All right, I'll come back.
Sorry. I'm so
No, that's
sorry.
fine. That's me, not you. All right.
Probably easy to use the methylene blue. Cool. So handpicked just a few human studies to talk about here. Number one is just basically kind of like the foundational clinical trial for methemoglobinemia, which is basically what it's actually on label and indicated for. So basically these patients, they gave them methylene blue. I think it was super high doses. I apologize, I did not include the dose, but I think it's what's considered high, which is like basically 1 mg per kg, or like 1 milligram per kilogram of body weight. I think it was like around there. And within like 30 to 60 minutes, they were basically like normal. So I think most people have seen like the pulse oximeter, like the oxygen saturation. Basically, these people went from 85% to 95% within an hour, which is quite incredible. And methylene blue is also, just given that it has like these neurological mechanism of actions, they've tested it for a bunch of like neurological conditions, one of which being bipolar disorder. They gave it methylene blue in combination with one of these SSRI. No, it wasn't SSRI. I apologize. It was some other kind of like depression therapeutic. And yeah, they were able to show that they got a significant reduction in depressive symptoms. And they also saw an anxiety reduction as well, both of which were significant. I handpicked these though. In total honesty, there's a ton of papers, but I thought these two in particular were important to look at. And there's kind of a third, which I think is the basis for methylene blue as a nootropic. It was a study done in 2016. It was 26 healthy adults, so no diseases. And what they did was they gave them 0.5 mg per kg of methylene blue versus placebo. They put them under fMRI scanners and they gave them memory tests. And what they found, and by the way, this is like a fairly high dose of methylene blue. Like this is beyond, like well beyond the dose of perception. You're really trending into like, this is, I could say this is like halfway between a microdose and a therapeutic dose that would be treated for medical purposes. So consider this like a fairly high dose. But they did find a significant result. So short-term memory improved. They had a 12% word recall improvement. That was significant. And they also showed improved attention. So a shorter reaction time, also significant. So functionally, people were quote unquote smarter. They had better short-term memory and they had a shorter reaction time. And so, better brain function, but also via functional MRI, which is looking at, brain, basically blood flow in the brain. They also showed that there was significantly more kind of like brain activity as measured by blood flow in the prefrontal cortex, which is super interesting. The only adverse effect was blue urine, and that was temporary. And yeah, this kind of like served the basis that MB is potentially a cognitive enhancer. Was there a question?
Yeah, just a comment actually about whether it affects longevity. So I have a very well-informed friend who has a theory that for something to affect longevity, it has to either go through the PGC1 alpha or the NFKB pathways. I don't know if this does, but it would be something that someone could look into.
Yeah, so I think those are both immune pathways as far as I remember. NF-kappa B is like inflammatory cytokine. And I believe that methylene blue does have effect on the immune system. I think it's primarily through its vasoconstrictive properties. So, vasodilation and constriction has a huge effect on whether certain tissues are inflamed or not. So it's certainly, all this stuff is connected, right? It's all super connected. So there's certainly a possibility, but I wouldn't say that that's the only requirement. So, things like rapamycin affect mTOR. which maybe they also affect NF-kappa B, but it's primarily through like the caloric restriction kind of pathway that rapamycin effectuates itself. So I would kind of like disagree with that. That it is maybe sufficient, but it's not necessary.
Yeah, he's actually offered some level of reward for somebody who can find something, but it's not a huge prize. So I'll probably look into it. Thanks.
Of course. Awesome. So I think, there is a ton of human data on the more medical side of things. There was this one super cool paper on the, on healthy adults, basic cognitive enhancement, which is super cool, but that's very difficult to come by. Typically with like a lot of these nootropics or, compounds being given off label, you kind of have to look at anecdotes. Like as unreliable as they are in mass, they actually start to be, you can start to see the patterns. And, basically what I had is I just basically took a bunch of anecdotes from Reddit on Methylene Blue in the various nootropics supplements, like various subreddits, and I put it through AI. And this is kind of the summary that you get, which is just like most people talk about an energy boost. And, maybe this is placebo. You can never really tell with anecdotes, right? It's N of 1 and, it's not placebo controlled. And, there's a lot of issues with anecdotal evidence, but it also is powerful, and people feel basically less fatigued and more driven are kind of like the keywords that people are using to describe the effect of Methylene Blue. Some other are basically like used for endurance and stamina. So I think the important piece here is Methylene Blue is a vasoconstrictor that actually doesn't contribute to like hypertrophy. So if you want to build muscle, it's actually not the best for that. But those who are doing more like power-based activities and stamina, endurance-based activities do talk about an improvement there. But there is no kind of like VO2 max sort of study that's been done on Methylene Blue that I could find. I was looking as hard as I could. But if any of you find, or if you guys want to run a study together, I think it would be super, super high yield. And then, yeah, in terms of recovery, and maybe this has to do with the anti-inflammatory effects of, Methylene Blue being a vasoconstrictor, but people talk about, basically post-exercise recovery being improved by Methylene Blue. There's actually an interesting anecdote by the founder of Meraki Medical, which is like the biggest supplier of D2C Methylene Blue. Basically how he got started. He was an MMA fighter. And then, yeah, people also talk about like the increased mental focus, sharper focus, and, in the context of athletics, like enhanced athletic decision-making. So just being able to think better while they're doing athletic activities. Cool. So in terms of dosages, I would say like there's kind of, low dosages that people will take, as well as high dosages. So low dosages I would put into the category of like anything from 0.5 milligram to 4 milligrams. And yeah, kind of the pros here are that it's fairly safe from a side effect perspective. There's low risk of MAO inhibition. It may offer some mild antioxidant support, given that whole like Ross cycling and redox potential. The cons are it's likely placebo for athletics. It likely is not significant enough to receive any sort of ATP boost or vasoconstriction. And yeah, like you're probably not going to get any sort of athletic enhancement at this dosage, but certainly a nootropic one. And then at higher doses, that's basically where that study found that you actually start to see very significant cognitive enhancement from that previous study. But obviously, the problem with taking these higher doses is you have much larger risk of side effects. So any sort of MAO inhibition kind of side effects will be observed here. And yeah, I think, it's all about therapeutic window, right? And certainly the higher the dose, the riskier things start to become. But this is the range basically where the cognitive enhancement data starts to be significant. Cool. So Like most things, there are different routes of administration that you can administer this. IV is typically used in a medical setting. It's done typically slowly, just because of the kinetics, the pharmacokinetics of methylene blue. Oral is fairly common. That's what you saw RFK taking, just basically putting the liquid into, another liquid like water and drinking it. And then sublingual is also fairly common as well. This allows for faster absorption and more of like a pop rather than, kind of a slow body feeling that kind of takes time to manifest. And from some of the anecdotes you'll see, basically like people who take sublingual report that they feel the effects faster and more intensely versus oral, where the effects come on more slowly and are more dampened. Yeah, so super important. Besides the SSRI contraindication, there's methylene blue is also contraindicated for this rare genetic disorder. And it's super rare. You'd probably have to get genome sequencing in order to get this diagnosis, but huge risk associated with this particular genetic disease. And it has to do with how hemoglobin kind of like folds. And basically, if you take methylene blue, in addition to having this genetic disorder, you have basically lysis and like complete denaturing of hemoglobin. So it's super risky. And then, again, you cannot take it with an SSRI or serotonin boosting medication, and anything else that affects serotonin like 5-HTP or LSD or anything like that, I think would certainly do your research before ever considering combining them. So going back to the question that was asked about whether methylene blue stains your brain blue, I think it's important to understand methylene blue is used as a dye for medical purposes ex vivo. So when people show things like this brain on the right has been absolutely soaked in methylene blue. And so in terms of, if you take it, does it stain your internal organs? It can certainly stain your mouth if you do it sublingually. But in terms of whether if you take it orally or sublingually, even whether it stains like your internal organs, the answer is no. So if you take it IV for prolonged periods, it does have the potential to, but orally or sublingually, because the concentrations are so low, it gets clear pretty quickly. Cool. So where can you acquire methylene blue? The number one D2C supplier is it's called Meraki Medicinal. It was founded by this MMA fighter named Vance Elrod. He had a pretty traumatic brain injury from fighting, and he kind of like quote unquote cured himself, basically just self-treated with methylene blue, saw an incredible result, and was inspired to kind of like bring this to the rest of the world. And so he started Meraki Medicinal, and they have a ton of customers. They have a ton of customers. And if you look at, most of the, forums or on Twitter, like this is where most people get methylene blue. But also I just looked on Amazon and it's crazy, but you can basically get the second largest supplier, which is Biofarm. They sell on Amazon. You can get, I think it's $50 for 2 bottles. And so, God bless Jeff Bezos. Cool. So in summary, methylene blue is a super interesting compound, certainly deserves more attention and research. It has established medical uses and is FDA approved, but for very limited indications. It has demonstrated benefit for cognitive enhancement. And there's anecdotal evidence, but not conclusive evidence that it may have an athletic performance enhancement. But there is no strong evidence that it improves longevity. So that is kind of the end there. Thank you guys very much. Hope you enjoyed. Hope that wasn't too boring.
Yeah, so one question for the Biohacker group. Does anybody know of anyone who's done any N=1 or even group experiments with methylene blue so far? Sounds like not that we know of. Okay, thanks.
Sorry, I was muted. I was saying I've used it a bunch of times. I also have the added benefit. I've been able to utilize it with medical grade red light, which has been fantastic. There is a big
Do you want
difference.
to talk about it? Yeah, you should talk about what the synergism is there. I didn't mention it here, but go ahead.
No, the best thing just turns my blood purple. Red and blue just makes me purple. No, so I have access to arc LED beds, which are very powerful medical grade red light. And because blue was basically like, I guess, the opposite of red in the color spectrum, as far as we can see in wavelengths, it absorbs a lot of red light. So when I take the blue, methylene blue, the red light itself feels more powerful, and it even activates the methylene blue to be more powerful in and of itself. So like I get compounded effects. Like when I take the methylene blue, the nootropic effects of the methylene blue are enhanced in the red light bed, and the red light bed effects themselves feel more enhanced as well.
Yeah, and by the way, this is totally corroborated online as well from others. And actually, for skin infections, people have found that if you do red light therapy in addition to methylene blue, I think topically, like it is synergistic for skin infections.
Yeah, maybe I'll try that because I also have a full body red light panel.
The panels themselves aren't as cool as the medical grade ones. I have access to those too, and I've tried them. I use the True Light panels, and they're good, but I don't feel the same benefit I do from the like arc LED beds. But that's just
How about you?
I mean, they're all equal. I would say True Light, Platinum LED, Juve, they're all about equal as far as panels. They're really good. You'll get some benefits, and you'll probably activate the methylene blue more effectively. But the medical grade ones are just, they're a whole nother animal.
Kevin had a question just now. He's asking that would you recommend a smaller dose if you're using red light beds?
Me personally, I don't see a reason to take a smaller dose using them, unless like you have had an adverse reaction to the methylene blue. I'm doing it orally. I'm not doing it injection. So maybe if you're doing injection, you might want to. It might be too much. But even then, I've taken 15 milligrams of methylene blue in an IV, and I felt fine.
I had a question, like in terms of like this is purely like about your personal experiences, Benji. Like what were the side effects that you have experienced so far?
Given this is being recorded, I'm not going to comment on personal
Okay.
use if that's okay.
Okay, sure. Maybe we can, if anybody else has any questions, please go ahead. Maybe after that we can stop the recording and
Yeah, I remember you mentioned on the slide something with bipolar depression. Was that study regarding bipolar, like depression in, bipolar disorder, or general depression in general?
It was measuring depression symptoms in bipolar patients.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and anxiety as well. They had them take, I forget, I'm sorry, I'm not a psychologist, the test that you take for like the depression scale,
Yeah.
and that number was reduced significantly.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
All right, I have another question. Have you done any research or seen any research on the efficacy of combining methylene blue with some of the other mitochondrial enhancers, such as SLOOP, MOTC, SS31?
I've not seen specific research, but I've heard a lot of anecdotes that so I personally do triathlons, so I'm always looking for biohacking on that axis. And a lot of triathletes that I know take MOTC and methylene blue for races together.
What is their reported benefits been?
They're very fast. They're very fast.
Stacks up with what I've experienced. What about any of the other ones like SLOOP or SS31?
I don't know about either of those, but I do know people that take MOXC and methylene blue, and amoxapine is actually their race stack.
All right, not familiar with the amoxapine. I'm going to look that up. Love it.
You should look up amoxapine.
How did you start taking it?
I like I said, I'm not going to comment on personal use. So that's okay.
Okay.
Unless we stop the recording. That's okay.
Does anyone else have any questions? If not, then we're gonna stop the recording. And
All right,
then
last
dive in.
one.
Okay.
Any better benefit of doing it sublingually versus rectally? There's just
No
fun
idea.
question.
That's
Okay.
No idea. I mean, probably minimize the mouth staining that one can get.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Benji. That was awesome. That was really, really interesting and insightful.
I hope so.
So,
I hope so.
yeah, yeah, it was
Happy to send through this presentation. I think I sent Raven the link.
yeah. I am actually Raven, by the way.
Great to meet you.
Great to meet you too. It was
You
awesome,
never know.
honestly.
You never know. Anyway, I sent you the link, so if you want to send
Yeah,
it around to people, I've got all the references linked in there.
Awesome.
So.